What's up, everyone? It's Seth again from Radio Wave, and this is part B of my music publishing explainer. So let's get into it. On the first part, I talked about the basics of what publishing is, what copyrights are, what rights copyright owners have. And in this part, I'm going to get into some other questions that people have and hopefully give you answers to those and explain a bit more about how royalties work with publishing. So the first question I get a lot is the difference between a publisher and a publishing administrator. They are similar in a lot of ways, but there are some differences. So the similarities start with basically they both sign songwriters to collect performance and mechanical royalties. And if you're unsure about the difference between those two types of royalties, you can watch the basics of music royalties part 1, my first video, and start about the 954 mark. That'll give you a pretty detailed explanation about those two royalty streams. Um, Another similarity is they both can actively monetize the songs they control, or play songs, or assist songwriters in getting work, like getting work writing for other artists, so forth. They can also play songs in like films or TV shows. And I say can versus will or shall because it really depends on the publisher or the administrator. So traditionally, publishers did and have taken a more active role in helping writers in the creative space, basically anything outside of collecting royalties. So publishers, would sign a songwriter and kind of pitch them on, hey, if you sign with us, we'll help you get your songs in films and TV shows. We'll help place your songs with other artists to record them. We'll help you, get in writing sessions with other writers or artists so your songs can get placed and hopefully recorded and released. Publishing administrators can do that as well, but it's not typical of publishing administrators. Some are just simply, finding royalties, collecting those royalties, and paying songwriters. Others do offer those creative services, but sometimes when they do, they charge an additional percentage beyond, the basically percentage they would charge just to collect royalties. The main differences between the two are pretty profound. The biggest one is copyright ownership. So if you sign with a publisher, typically they will be owning the copyright of the songs that you write during the term that you're with them. Administrators do not own copyrights of songs. They are simply administering, the sort of functions of collecting royalties for those songs. So that is a huge difference. Some traditional music publishers will offer administration deals to writers, so that happens all the time. In that case, even though they are technically a music publisher, the deal that they're giving this writer is an administration deal. So again, in that situation, they would not own the copyrights. Also, contract terms is a big difference. For administrators, they're typically shorter than publishers. And in a future video, I'm going to talk about contracts, but the basics are, if you sign with a publisher, they're signing you for a term, and it's typically, it could be a short term, maybe, something like a year, but the term with a publisher more typically is based on the obligation of the writer. So it would be something like, we're going to sign you as a songwriter, and the first term of our agreement is you have to deliver 10 songs to us that get commercially released by other artists. Say that's what they're asking for. So that could take you a year to do, that could take you 2 years, that could take you 5 years. Whatever it takes you until you fulfill that obligation, the first term is not up. So that's why the terms can be longer with publishers. With administrators, they're basically going to say, hey, we want to sign you. The first term will be 2 years, let's say. That's pretty typical of a publishing administration deal. And after those 2 years, will roll into another 2 years unless before the end of that first 2 year term is up, you notify us in writing that you no longer want us to administer your songs. Another big difference is that, again, publishers typically own the copyrights of the songs, and they'll also still own those copyrights even if the writer is not signed to the publisher. So, how that works is basically if you sign to a publisher, and let's say you have that obligation and you fulfill it, so your first term is up. But at the end of that first term, the publisher decides, you know what, it's for us, it's not working out. Maybe they weren't happy with the songs that you delivered and they didn't earn money, or maybe in order to sign you to another term, in order for that to kind of continue on, they'd have to pay you a big advance and they don't think it's worth it. At that point, they can say, listen, we're going to drop you as a writer. You're no longer going to be, as a writer, signed to us. But even if that happens, they are still going to own the copyrights to the songs you wrote while you were signed with them. So during the term you were signed with the publisher, any songs you wrote during that term are going to be owned by the publisher. Now, that may be for a limited amount of time. It could be, say, 10 years, it could be 30 years, but it could be in perpetuity. It really depends on the deal you sign with the publisher. With an administrator, once you decide you no longer want to be with them, they no longer control the songs that you had with them during the term. So in that situation, say you sign with the publishing administrator, it's a 2 year term. After the first year, you're thinking, you know what, this isn't working out. I thought they'd collect more money from me. Maybe they did promise you, hey, we'll get you some, syncs in films and TV, and they didn't do that, or whatever the case may be. You're just not happy with the situation. So prior to the end of that first period, that first term, the contract will usually stipulate, like, say, 30 days in advance of the, end of the first term, either party can kind of, dissolve this relationship by sending a notice in writing. So you're the writer, you send a notice in writing to the publishing administrator saying, hey, look, this isn't working out. I don't want to, re-up. I don't want this to roll over to the next 2 year period. In that situation, once that first term is up, you're free to go. The songs that you had with them for administration come with you. Now, in pretty much every administration deal, there will be what they call a post-term collection period. And that's kind of fair, and it's also to protect the administrator. So say, you have, 50 songs with them, and they're collecting royalties on those songs, and you decide, hey, it's not working out. You give them the notice, you're out of the deal, but there's still money coming in that they were administering during the term. They're going to say to you, look, we were working on your behalf for these 2 years. We deserved at least some kind of post term to collect the monies that were coming in. So those kind of post term collection periods are very limited, and typically they may be like a year. So like a year after the deal's up and you leave, for an additional year, they still get to collect the royalties that come in on your behalf and pay you whatever your deal said. And then after that post-term year is up, they won't be collecting anymore, and you'll be collecting directly, or maybe you sign with a different administrator, or maybe you sign with a publisher, and they'll be collecting going forward. And I kind of hinted at this while I was talking about these differences, but the other big difference is that when it comes to agreements between publishers and administrators, with publishers, they are typically the ones that determine whether or not you as a writer are still in the deal. So it's their decision whether to keep you on as a writer or not. With an administration deal, it's completely your decision whether you want to stay with them or not. So that is another big difference. And then it comes down to percentages. With a publishing deal, typically they're going to charge you or take a bigger cut of your royalties than an administrator would. So a typical publishing deal, which are kind of referred to as co-publishing deals, in the business, they're going to take 25% of all the publishing royalties that come in. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more in a couple slides here, that kind of how that works. With an administration deal, they're going to take a lesser percentage, typically 10 to 20%. And some, publishing deals, they can take up to 50%. Now, I wouldn't sign a deal like that, but it's not unheard of that happens. And the reason publishers typically take a bigger percentage than administrators is that, again, this is not a set in stone situation, but they usually give writers advances, whereas administrators usually do not. Administrators can give advances and definitely do give advances, particularly to bigger songwriters who maybe they have a track record of a lot of hits, or they have a prolific catalog that really generates a lot of money, and sometimes to induce or attract bigger writers, they'll say, hey, listen, we're going to still do this admin, you still control and own the copyrights, but in order for you to come over, we're going to give you an advance as well. But again, that's more typical of a publisher than an administrator. And then, people also always ask which one's better to sign with, and also, do you even need a publisher or administrator? And to answer the second question, you do not need a publisher or administrator, but there are situations where you probably should at least have an administrator. If you're a completely independent songwriter, maybe you're a newer artist and songwriter, you don't necessarily need anybody to collect from you. You can collect pretty much all the royalties that are due to you, with one exception, which is mechanical royalties from on-demand streams, and I talked about that in the Basics of Music Royalties Part 1. So if you don't have a publisher or administrator, it is virtually impossible to collect mechanical royalties from on-demand streams that are based outside your home country, at least as a U.S. writer. And it may be different for writers from other countries, but as a U.S. writer, if you don't have an administrator, you're not going to get those mechanical royalties that are generated or originate outside the U.S. But everything else you can pretty much collect without an administrator or publisher. As far as which one's better to sign with, you're going to sign, I would say generally an administrator, because again, you own the copyrights to your songs. You're not giving up ownership, and it's always good to own. And that goes with a lot of things. Own your own home. Own anything is probably better if it's a royalty generating entity, like your house can increase in value. Your publishing catalog can also increase in value, and if you own it, that royalty stream comes to you forever. If you don't own it, you're giving up A, ownership, and B, a big chunk of your royalty streams. The only reason you should sign with a publisher is because they are giving you money that is life-changing to you, or your career. So never sign a publishing deal where you're giving up copyright ownership without an advance. And as far as life-changing goes, I mean, that number is whatever, works for your life or your career. It could be $1 million, it could be $20,000. I mean, I can't really tell you that, but if it's not something that will materially change, either your personal financial situation or your career prospects, then do not sign that publishing deal, because publishers and administrators will promise you a lot if they're doing creative stuff, like, hey, we're going to get your songs in this film and TV show, we can hook you up with all these writers, we can hook you up with all these artists. And not because they don't try, but there's no guarantees when it comes to that, right? I mean, you could be one of 200 writers they have signed, and maybe you're not a priority. They could be really trying to get your stuff in films and TV shows, but it just doesn't happen. And so I wouldn't sign with somebody based on those promises. I would sign with them based on how much money you think they're going to collect from you. And again, when it comes to a publisher, how much money they're giving you up front to sign that deal. Okay, in the Basics of Music Royalties Part 1, I talked about those, two major types of music publishing royalties, performance and mechanicals. So I'm not going to go over that again. But um, with royalties, there are also two sides to royalties, and they're called shares. There's the songwriter share or the writer share, and the publisher share. So, as the names indicate, writer share is payable to the songwriter, him or herself, and publisher share is payable to the entity or entities that publish the song. So if you are a self-published writer, you're going to get both the writer share and the publisher share directly to you. In certain situations, you have to have kind of an entity name at least set up. So for example, if you are signed with ASCAP as a self-published writer, in order to collect that publisher share of the performance royalties, you must have a publishing company name to receive those royalties. Now, it doesn't have to be a formal company like a corporation or LLC. It doesn't have to have a bank account, but it has to be a name that they associate with you on the publisher's side. For if you're with BMI, you don't have to do that. So BMI does not require that. They'll give you both the writer share and the publisher share without that entity. And then also to receive on-demand streaming mechanical royalties as a self-published writer, you must sign up as a quote-unquote publisher, at least in the US, with a collective management organization called the Mechanical Licensing Collective. And that may be true in other countries as well. So again, if you don't sign up as a publisher, you don't get those royalties either. And this next slide is going to kind of go into kind of how this writer share, publisher share thing kind of works. So this is something that a lot of people use to explain publishing, the music publishing pie. So if you think of music publishing as a big pie worth 100%, half that pie is the writer share and half is the publisher share. So when it comes to performance royalties that you get through your PRO like ASCAP or BMI, or mechanical royalties that you might get paid, from a record label or directly from the MLC. There's different shares that go to the writer and different shares that go to the publisher. Again, with the MLC, they're paying the publisher is then paying the writer. So if you're self-published, you're essentially paying yourself. But if you are signed with, say, a publishing administrator or a publisher, MLC is paying them, they're paying you. Which brings me to this next graphic, which is if you are signed to a publisher or a publishing administrator, this is how the pie splits up. So again, a typical co-publishing deal where it's called co-publishing because you as the writer still have control of those songs. You haven't given up control. So the publisher is quote-unquote co-publishing the songs with you, even though in most situations they own the copyright, at least for a decent amount of time. So in those situations, the writer's share is that half, the 50%, and then the publisher or publishing administrator shares in the publisher's share. And again, this is a typical co-publishing deal. They're going to get 25% of the whole pie, which equals 50% of the publisher's share, and then they're going to give you the other 25% of that pie. So again, the other 50% of the publisher's share. So how this would work is that in a typical co-publishing deal, they're taking 25%. They are giving you 75%. So basically, of all the royalties they collect, and the one part of royalties they do not collect is performance royalties for songwriter share. That goes directly to you, the songwriter, and should always go to you. So if anybody's asking you to sign some kind of deal where they're collecting your songwriter share of performance royalties, do not sign it. It is not legitimate. And again, when it comes to deals, the percentages get a little wonky and complicated, but when I get into another video that talks about publishing deals, I'll explain it. But that's the basic concept. Writer shares half, publisher shares half, co-publishers, administrators share in the publisher share of the royalties. And again, if it's say an administration deal, instead of 25%, maybe they take 15% or 10%. but the concept remains the same. All right, what are the rates for performance royalties? Outside of on-demand streaming, the short answer is it depends, and few people, including me, know exactly. So when you think about in the old days, traditional performance royalties, that was like, you get played on the radio, your song gets played on TV in some TV show or something like that, or it's played at a venue, either live or in a recorded form. So the rates for those different uses really depends on different factors. And for example, and this again, this is U.S. only. It's different in different countries, but for the U.S., how the music is used, for example, is it featured? Is it theme music? Is it background music? Those will pay different rates. Where is the music performed? Was it on a radio station, network TV, cable TV, video streaming service, etc.? Those rates will vary then. And also what rate the licensee of the music has agreed to pay the different PROs. So every type of licensee has a different rate. So as I mentioned in the basics of music royalties, for example, in the U.S., uh, public radio, public television gets a different rate, so they'll get a lower rate. So there, if you get played on one of those stations, you're going to get paid a different rate than if you got played on a commercial radio station or a network TV station. And then for TV, what time was it performed? So they'll pay different rates for prime time versus overnight. So if your music is on a TV show that airs at 8 o'clock in the evening, it gets, you get paid more than if it, airs at 3 in the morning. So that's a big difference. When it comes to on-demand audio streaming, it's a little bit complicated, but basically in the U.S., publishers and songwriters will currently share in 15.1% of revenues generated by paid subscribers, advertising, any marketing products that the on-demand streamer sells. So say you're Spotify, you have, a base of subscribers, you have advertising revenue, maybe you sell some products to, artists or labels to market on your site. That revenue gets put into a big pie, a big pool, and then out of that, 15.1% is split between all the songwriters and publishers that have music on the site. And this next slide will illustrate that a bit further. So here's how this works. And this is why people don't really understand streaming royalties and I don't get paid anything for streams. This sucks, that kind of thing. Well, this is how it really breaks down so you can understand, why that is the case. So I'm going to use a very simple example. Let's say that a streaming service like Spotify, they earn $100 from subscribers, advertisers, any other revenue streams that they're bringing in for the month. So their deal is they keep 25% of that 100. So they're going to keep $25. And they're going to pay out the rest to the rights holders, which are the master rights holders and the songwriting copyright holders, like the publishers and songwriters. So basically what happens is 60% of the money will go to the master rights holders, which is typically labels, or if you're self-released artists, if you own your own master, that money is going to you. So collectively, all those people share in that $60. The remaining 15% gets paid to songwriters and publishers, so that's $15. And as you can see, it's a small amount of that 100. And the reasons for this have nothing to do with what Spotify or Apple Music wants. These are the deals that were negotiated when these services started between them and primarily major record labels. So that's a whole nother story, but if you want to blame anybody for low songwriter and publishing royalties, blame the major labels. So if you're a self-published songwriter, you're going to get that 15% paid directly to you. So it's going to come through both your PRO and the MLC in the US if you're signed up with them. So basically what happens is if you're signed to a publisher, they're collecting that money and they're paying out their songwriters a percentage of mechanicals. And your PRO, again, is paying you as a songwriter. It's paying the publisher, their publisher share. But basically, publishers are collecting on your behalf and then paying you based on your deal. That 15% is roughly split in half between the PROs and the MLC. So say it's 15 bucks, $7.50 be collected by the PROs, and $7.50 will be collected by the MLC. And again, I always want to stress this. As a songwriter, your songwriter share performance should always be paid directly to you, not the publishers. And that's the end of part 2. So that's a lot about music publishing. Again, look out for more videos I'm going to do delving into publishing contracts, record contracts, and other sort of more legal and financial things related to artists and songwriters. If you have any questions, hit me up. There's the email. Also, again, I consult for artists and help artists with all kinds of things, not just contracts and royalties, but touring, marketing, etc. Got a project, please reach out and let's talk about it. All right, thanks for watching, and hope to see you on the next one.